As parachute riggers, when we get a rig into the shop, one of the things we look at is when was the rig manufactured. Older rigs we're certainly going to look at harder. Some manufacturers would say that there's a age at which the parachute ought to just be turned into a car cover, but a lot depends on how the parachute was cared for. So do we really retire a parachute based on age, or do we look for problems with its condition? In this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about how our parachute owners take care of their parachutes. We're going to look at some data about how nylon parachute assemblies age. We're going to talk about parachute rigger inspection practices. And finally, the Parachute Industry Association has established a strength test that is non-destructive. We will talk about that. Some owners take very good care of their parachutes. Other owners view them as glorified seat cushions that the FAA requires that they wear because of the type of flying they're doing. And we see some really interesting uh, treatment of the parachutes. We've seen parachutes left on the hangar floor. We see them scraped along the ground as they're being taken off. Um, the uh, condition of the parachute reflects the care it gets. And as you can see from the pictures here, we have one parachute that looks like it's in pretty good shape, the one on the top. And then one on the bottom, you can probably see the dirt, and I think there's mold on it um, that is very hard to get off with soap and water. When a parachute rigger gets an older rig in and is concerned about the age, the obvious first place to go look for guidance is the FAA. In this letter, the FAA essentially says that it's up to the parachute rigger to evaluate the condition. Maybe the parachute rigger gets advice from the manufacturer, but for a parachute to have a true service life in the FAA sense, the manufacturer has to issue a service bulletin and request an airworthiness directive from the FAA. None of the parachute manufacturers have actually done that. While a few of the parachute manufacturers have suggested that their products should come out of service based on calendar time, it's interesting that Strong Enterprises has published the statement below that basically says that there is no service life and each individual parachute rigger has to apply their knowledge to determine if a specific parachute rig is airworthy, regardless of its age. One of the worst things you can do to a parachute is leave it out in the sun for a long time exposed to UV. UV has been shown very conclusively to degrade nylon. One of the things that Strong Enterprises did to make this point is they ran a test where they put samples of Type 7 webbing, the kind of webbing used in parachute harnesses, out in the sun for a very long time. And periodically they would bring a sample into their strength testing machine and break it to determine how strong it was or how much strength it had lost due to exposure to the sun. The samples were out from sunrise to sunset. And as you can see from this picture, which is part of actually a larger picture, this shows their testing out to 160 days. And you can see the measurements that show the loss of strength with exposure to the sun. Parachute riggers are not the only people interested in how nylon ages. This slide describes a study that was done at Sandia National Laboratories where they put some samples in laboratory conditions of temperature and humidity that would accelerate the aging. And as you can read here, the abstract is available online, that these people determined that nylon holds its strength and characteristics for a very long time. Now, lab conditions are not the same as the real world, where we get a lot of UV exposure and, of course, the abuse of the users. When a parachute rigger takes in a parachute, it gets a very careful inspection. It gets hung up where it gets its first look. It gets stretched out on the packing table, and the harness, the container, the lines, and every gore of the canopy, as well as the bridles and pilot chute, are given a careful visual inspection. Now, to test the strength of the canopy, traditionally the parachute rigger has used their thumb to push on the fabric, and you can see what's being done in the picture on the right. As you might guess, each parachute rigger has a different sized hand, different sized thumb, different hand strength. So the thumb test is not very accurate. The results are very variable. Parachute Industry Association created a spec for the fabric and a test. Fabric is supposed to be able to handle 40 pounds of tension applied across 3 inches of fabric on the axis of the weave. In the pictures below, you can see on the left the clamps we use, then the fish scale rigged onto the packing table. The middle picture shows some parachute fabric. We found an old Security 350 to test. The next picture shows the fish scale reading 40 pounds. And finally, on the right, we have the packing data card for the parachute we tested. It's an old Security 350 manufactured in 1982, 40 years ago, and it passed the test. Going into details about the clamps, these are Craig clamps, and they have been modified to have rubber jaws, in which each rubber jaw is 1 inch by 1 inch, and the clamping force has been adjusted to just be able to hold the fabric under 40 pounds of tension. We do that so that we do not damage the fabric as part of this test. To put the test tension on the parachute fabric we are testing, we use the fish scale as shown here. We harness it to the packing table and we add a threaded rod tensioning mechanism to apply the tension force to the fabric being tested. In the center picture, you can see the threaded rod tension device, and in the rightmost picture, looking the other way, you can see how the clamp on the other end is harnessed to the packing table. And in that picture, we are putting tension on a small piece of 1.1 ounce ripstop fabric that we've had in our toolbox for quite some time. To summarize, the manufacturers and the parachute riggers can try to estimate the service life of the parachutes, but an awful lot is dependent upon the care that an individual owner applies to the parachute. Parachute rigger inspects for obvious damage, holes, foreign object deterioration, maybe failing stitching, but the environmental effects, UV and whatever else the parachute's exposed to, are hard to evaluate visually. The thumb test is variable and doesn't come close to testing that the parachute has its full strength. So what we see is that some newer parachutes that are not well taken care of at all have a very short service life. And then there are older parachutes that are taken very good care of that may be many years old, but they're perfectly airworthy. So if we have any doubt about that, this PIA 108.1 test is a good standardized repeatable test. We can do it with simple tools. And if we can get a 40-pound stress measurement That's a determination that the fabric's in good shape. And if the owner ever has to use it, it's pretty likely that the canopy will do what it's supposed to do and open and hopefully deposit the wearer on the ground safely. So if we have any doubt, we have a test to apply, and we don't need to stick our finger in the air and tell the owner, no, it's too old, we can't pack it. We can take it into our shop and we can do this test and we can say, yes, it's okay, or no, it's not. Thanks for listening.